Colt Kane had grown up beneath the vast skies and endless plains of the Iron Creek Rancha, a place as wild and unyielding as the man who built it, his father, Bartholomew Kane. The ranch stretched farther than the eye could see, a kingdom of cattle, fences, and dusty trails, ruled by a man whose will could break horses and men alike. Colt had always known that one day the ranch would become his. What he didn't know was how sharply time could shift a destiny. Bartholomew had always seemed immortal. He rode like a younger man, barked orders with a thunderous voice, and kept the ranch running with an iron fist. But age crept into his bones in ways even he couldn't ignore. The coughs grew deeper. His steps, once steady as the earth itself, occasionally faltered. One morning, after an especially violent coughing spell, Bartholomew summoned Colt to his study, a room filled with maps, deeds, and the smell of tobacco that had soaked into the walls over decades. Colt entered expecting another lecture on cattle prices or pasture rotation. What he received instead was a demand that shook him to his core. "You're 24. Bartholomew rasped, leaning heavily against the desk. A man your age should already have a wife at his side, a legacy waiting in the cradle. His eyes, sharp even in sickness, pinned Colt in place. This ranch needs stability, a proper future, and that means you choose a bride within a month. Colt blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. Marriage had always been something distant, something he would reach when he felt ready, not an obligation forced upon him. Like a business merger. Bartholomew's voice hardened. If you fail to choose a suitable wife, someone from a respectable, established family, I'll have no choice but to leave the ranch in other hands. He let the implication hang in the air. Colt knew exactly what that meant. The ranch could go to distant cousins, business associates, even land-hungry rivals. Colt stepped back as if struck. You'd really take the ranch from me just because I'm not ready to marry? Bartholomew slammed his cane against the floor. Readiness is a luxury. Responsibility is not. This land is worth more than your stubbornness. Colt felt heat rise in his chest. Yes, he loved the ranch, its open field mornings, its thunderstorm nights, the smell of hay and leather and freedom. But the idea of choosing a wife like picking a prize horse felt wrong. Marriage isn't a transaction, he argued. You can't just force. I can and I will. Bartholomew cut him off. A man without a strong wife stands on shaky ground. This ranch deserves better. He paused, breath shallow. I won't let it crumble because my son can't make a decision. Colt clenched his fists. Arguing with his father was like shouting at a stone wall, unyielding, unmoving, impossible to shift. He wanted to rebel, to shout that his life wasn't a chess piece for the old man to move. But watching his father struggle for breath, a mix of fear and frustration filled his chest. Bartholomew wasn't just demanding obedience. He was terrified of losing control, of dying before ensuring the ranch's future. After a long silence, Bartholomew spoke again, softer this time. I built this place to last, but I won't live forever. He fixed Colt with a determined stare. 30 days. Find a bride. Or you find another home. With that, the ultimatum was sealed. Colt walked out of the study with his mind spinning. He felt trapped between duty and resentment, between the legacy he cherished and the freedom he clung to. The sun outside felt harsher than usual, the wind colder. Across the yard, ranch hands moved like distant silhouettes, and somewhere in the far corner of the ranch, he spotted a girl in ragged clothes brushing down a trembling horse. The news spread across Iron Creek faster than wildfire. Colt Kane, heir to the wealthiest ranch in 3 counties, was being forced to choose a bride within 30 days. Every family with a daughter suddenly discovered a renewed interest in the Kane estate. Letters arrived by the handful, tied in ribbons and weighed down with perfume. Mothers who had never once acknowledged the Cane Ranch now sent baskets of pies, fruit, and lace-trimmed handkerchiefs, each one a desperate attempt to stand out. Colt had never felt more hunted. Within the first week, the cane porch became a stage for young women dressed in their finest gowns. Their shoes, polished to a shine, trod on dusty ranch boards not built for such delicate elegance. Their ribbons fluttered in the wind while their mothers watched like hawks, elbows sharp, eyes sharper. Colts of a different kind bucked in the nearby paddock, oblivious to the matrimonial frenzy. Colt stood stiffly during each introduction, knowing his father was watching from the window above. Bartholomew insisted on formality, so Colt greeted each visitor. Though his smile gradually wilted like a flower left in the sun, the first to arrive was Miss Adeline Crowley, the pride of a well-off merchant family. She carried a parasol and spoke in a voice as sweet as molasses and just as sticky. "Oh, Mr. Kane," she gushed, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "I do hope I'm not intruding." But Colt could see her eyes calculating the size of the ranch house, measuring its wealth more than its warmth. Next came the Beaumont twins, dressed identically and giggling so loudly the horses whinnied in annoyance. They fluttered around Colt like butterflies made of silk and ribbons. "You ride, don't you, Mr. Kane?" one asked. "We simply adore a man who rides," added the other. Colt nodded politely, though he doubted either girl had touched a saddle in her life. By the end of the second week, the situation escalated into a full-blown spectacle. Families arrived on wagons decorated as if for a parade. Some brought musicians. Others brought baskets of gifts, jams, quilts, embroidered napkins with K stitched in hopeful preparation for Kane. One overzealous mother even brought a dowry chest, as if Colt might choose her daughter simply out of convenience. Inside, Colt felt suffocated. He couldn't deny that many of these women were lovely, some charming, some intelligent, some genuinely kind. But they all shared one thing: they came because of the ranch, not because of him. Every conversation felt rehearsed. Every smile felt placed. Every compliment smelled of desperation. But worst of all, Bartholomew encouraged it. He began inviting wealthy ranching families to dinner, forcing Colt to sit through long, tedious evenings of polite conversation and not-so-subtle hints. "Colt, why don't you show Miss Abigail the garden?" Bartholomew would say in his gravel-filled voice, ignoring Colt's silent pleas. Or, "Son, Miss Lydia plays the piano beautifully. You should listen while she performs." Colt learned quickly that listen meant pretend to be charmed. Night after night, he endured the parade of suitors, each more determined than the last. He rode his horses earlier and stayed out longer just to escape the pressure. But even then, mothers would appear at the fence line waving lace handkerchiefs, begging for a moment of his time. The ranch, his refuge since childhood, was turning into a carnival of polished shoes, perfume clouds, and high-pitched laughter. But in every crowd, Colt's gaze drifted to the outskirts, toward the barns, the stables, the quiet corners where no silk gowns dared to tread. There, in simple rags, moving like a shadow in the background, was Mara, the orphan stable girl, while others arrived in dresses worth more than a month's wages. She wore torn sleeves and mud-stained boots. While the other girls practiced elegant smiles, Mara kept her eyes lowered, focused only on her work. And every time Colt's eyes found her, something inside him steadied. The parade of suitors was loud, glittering, and relentless. But the girl in rags, silent, unnoticed, was the only one who felt real. Even if Colt refused to admit it yet, the choice his father demanded was already beginning to take root. In the most unexpected place, Mara had lived on the Cane Ranch for nearly 2 years, yet almost no one knew anything about her. She moved through the place like a whisper, present, necessary, but never noticed. The ranch hands called her the Quiet One, and most of the Kane family guests didn't realize she existed at all. She wore the same faded, oversized dress day after day, patched so many times that the original fabric was impossible to identify. The boots she wore were mismatched in color and half a size too big. Donations from a ranch hand who pitied her, but despite her ragged appearance, she worked harder than any of them. Each morning before dawn, when the sky was still blue-black and the air stung cold, Mara swept the barn aisles, fed the horses, and hauled buckets of water that tested the strength of her slender arms. She cleaned stalls the others avoided, handled the skittish colts no one wanted to train, and always stayed late to finish whatever was left undone by the men, who cared more for their wages than their duties. She never complained, never asked for more food or better clothes, never protested when someone blamed her for a mess she didn't make. She simply dipped her head, murmured a soft, "I'll handle it," and disappeared again into her work dot to the rest of the ranch. Mara was background like the dust, the rope coils, the stacks of hay. But Colt had noticed her long before he understood why Dot at first. It was small things. He'd often pass by the barn early in the morning, catching a glimpse of a slight figure scattering feed with surprising gentleness, humming under her breath. Sometimes he'd see her sitting in the shade during her brief lunch break, sharing her breadcrumbs with the barn cats. Other times, he found her repairing old tack with deft fingers, treating cracked leather as delicately as if it were something precious. She never spoke unless spoken to. She avoided eye contact. She bowed her head whenever he walked by. But Colt, though buried under the pressures of his father's expectations, had the habit of observing people more than they realized, and Mara was someone he couldn't seem to ignore. Still, she tried desperately to remain invisible, especially during the weeks when wealthy families paraded their daughters around the ranch like show horses. She kept to the far side of the barns, slipping between stalls, hiding behind piles of hay, or working in the dim corners where the lantern light barely reached. The girls in silk gowns never saw her. Their mothers didn't even bother to look down, but Colt saw her. Every time that one afternoon, while Miss Adeline Crowley practiced walking gracefully across the pasture in heeled boots that sank into the mud, Colt caught sight of Mara carrying a heavy sack of feed on her shoulder. She staggered slightly under the weight, but she steadied herself without help, disappearing into the barn through a door no lady in town would ever dare touch. Colt found himself watching that door long after she passed through it. There was something about the contrast that he couldn't shake. Mara's quiet strength versus the delicate pretenses of the women being paraded before him. She didn't wear ribbons or perfume. She didn't try to charm him. She didn't even seem to believe she had the right to stand in the same world as him. And yet, she carried herself with a certain resilience, an unspoken dignity that made her ragged clothing look like armor rather than shame. Still, Colt kept his distance. His father's shadow loomed over him, and Mara's status was painfully clear. She was an orphan, no family, no dowry, no connections. Merely a worker surviving off the scraps of the ranch's generosity. But every time Colt caught glimpses of her, something inside him shifted, an instinctive tug he didn't understand yet. He didn't know her story. He didn't know her scars. He didn't even know her voice well. He only knew one thing. While the world paraded polished brides under his nose, the real heart of the ranch lived quietly in the shadows, dressed in rags and doing work no one respected. Mara didn't seek his attention, but fate had already begun to place her in his path, just waiting for the moment when their worlds would collide. The night it happened, the ranch was wrapped in an uneasy stillness, a quiet so dense it made every sound stand out sharper, like the world was holding its breath. The sun had long dipped behind the western hills, leaving streaks of violet and amber fading into the horizon. Most of the ranch hands had already turned in. their lanterns dimming one by one across the yard. The only steady glow came from the barn, where a single lantern flickered like a heartbeat in the dark. Colt was restless. After another exhausting afternoon of forced socializing 3 potential brides in one day, each more artificial than the last, he had escaped into the night. He saddled his horse and rode out onto the open land, letting the cool wind wash the exhaustion from his skin. But even the stars couldn't quiet the noise in his mind. His father's ultimatum, the parade of suitors, the weight of responsibility, everything clung to him like dust he couldn't shake. By the time he headed back toward the ranch, it was late. The air had turned cool and earthy, carrying the soft scent of hay and distant pine. As Colt dismounted and walked past the barn, a sudden noise shattered the calm, a desperate, panicked whinny that echoed into the night. Colt paused. Another crash followed, the sound of hooves slamming against wooden stall boards. Something was wrong. He pushed open the barn doors, expecting to find a spooked horse alone. Instead, the lantern light revealed a chaotic scene. A young stallion, newly brought in from a cattle drive, was thrashing wildly inside its stall, rearing and kicking in blind terror. Dust filled the air, floating like ghosts in the lantern glow, and in the middle of it all stood Mara, the orphan stable girl in rags. Her boots were planted firmly in the straw, her sleeves rolled up, her hair coming loose from its braid. But what struck Colt was the calm on her face, a soft determination, not fear. She held one hand up gently, palm open, murmuring something he couldn't hear from where he stood. "Mara," he hissed, stepping forward. "Get out of there. That horse'll kill you." She didn't even flinch at his voice. Instead, she glanced at him briefly, just long enough for him to see the flicker of frustration in her eyes. "Don't shout," she said softly. "You're scaring him more." Her voice was quiet, almost soothing, but it carried a strength Colt hadn't expected, like she was speaking to both him and the horse at once. Colt froze, stunned, as she turned her attention back to the stallion. Slowly, miraculously, the horse responded, its breathing steadied, its frantic movements softened. Mara took a single step closer, whispering in a gentle rhythm, her hands still raised. Inch by inch, the trembling animal lowered its head, until its forehead touched her palm. The moment felt unreal, spiritual, like watching lightning calm itself into rain. Colt stood speechless. When the horse finally stilled fully, Mara stroked its neck with a tenderness that could melt stone. She whispered something, her voice so soft he couldn't catch the words, and the stallion let out a long, shuddering exhale. Only then did she turn to Colt. Her eyes were luminous in the lantern light, her cheeks flushed from exertion but not fear. She brushed a stray strand of hair from her face with the back of a dirt-streaked arm. "He wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she explained quietly. "He's just scared. They brought him in too fast. He hasn't learned this barn yet." Colt suddenly felt young, much younger than 24, humbled, disarmed. I didn't know you could do that," he managed. Mara shrugged, gaze dropping to the straw. "Horses are easy," she murmured. "It's people who are hard." Colt didn't have a response, not one that made sense, but as he stood there, watching this girl in rags soothe a wild animal with nothing but patience and kindness, something inside him shifted, something quiet but powerful. For the first time since his father's ultimatum, Colt felt clarity. This girl wasn't loud or polished, or desperate for attention like the others. She wasn't pretending. She wasn't performing. She was real, and that was more dangerous for Colt's heart than any wild horse in that barn. The night after Colt witnessed Mara calming the panicked stallion, he found himself drifting back toward the barns again. He told himself it was to check on the young horse, but deep inside, he knew that wasn't entirely true. Something about that moment, Myra standing unflinching before a terrified animal had settled into his thoughts like an ember refusing to die. The ranch house was alive with noise that evening. Several guests were still lingering after dinner, mothers whispering behind gloves, daughters gliding around the drawing room with practiced elegance, hoping Colt might escort one of them for a stroll. His father watched all of it with a satisfied smile. Colt slipped out the back door. He needed fresh air, space, quiet. The barns, as always, offered exactly that. The lanterns were low when he entered, throwing long shadows across the wooden beams. Horses shifted in their stalls, hooves clopping softly against the dirt. The familiar smell of hay, grain, and leather wrapped around him like a comforting old friend. And there, near the back of the barn, he saw her. Mara knelt beside an old wooden trunk, repairing a worn saddle with a needle and thread. Her hair was tied up loosely, several strands falling across her cheek as she worked. The lantern on the wall cast a warm glow over her, outlining the quiet concentration in her eyes. Colt hesitated before stepping closer. "Working late?" Mara glanced up, startled, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice her existence. "The stitching came loose," she said softly. "If I don't fix it tonight, it could break during tomorrow's ride. Mind if I sit?" Colt asked. Her brows lifted slightly, unsure why the heir of the ranch would want to sit next to her in the dirt, but she nodded. Colt settled beside her, watching her fingers move with surprising skill. "You're good at that." "I've had practice," she murmured. Then, after a pause, "It's easier than talking to people." He gave a quiet laugh. "Believe me, I understand that." She smiled faintly, a rare expression he wasn't sure he'd ever seen from her. But as she shifted, the lantern light caught something on her wrist. Colt leaned in, eyes narrowing. Bruises, dark, fresh, and shaped like fingers. Mara realized the moment he saw them. Her hand jerked back, sleeve dropping down to hide the marks. "It's nothing," she said quickly. "I'm clumsy." "That's not from being clumsy," Colt said, voice low. "Who did that to you?" Mara shook her head firmly. "Please don't ask." But Colt's jaw was already tightening. Was it Turner? Turner was the head stableman, short-tempered, heavy-handed, and far too fond of using his authority to intimidate the younger workers. Mara's silence was answer enough. Colt felt anger burn through him. His hands curled into fists. "If he touched you, it doesn't matter," Mara whispered. "I work here. I don't get to complain. I just keep my head down." He stared at her, stunned by the resignation in her voice. "Mara, no one has the right to hurt you." She didn't respond. Instead, she pushed the saddle away and reached into the trunk, pulling out a small lantern. As she lit it, Colt noticed something else: books. A handful of worn second-hand books tucked carefully in the corner, their pages creased from frequent reading. "You read?" Colt asked, surprised. Mara nodded shyly. "Only at night, when the chores are done. Books don't judge me. They don't yell." She looked away. "Sometimes they feel like the only place I'm not invisible." Invisible. The word hit Colt harder than he expected. This girl, who carried more burden than anyone else on the ranch, who worked harder than all the polished ladies who visited, felt unseen, unprotected, alone. He exhaled slowly. "You shouldn't be invisible," he murmured. Her eyes flickered up to his, uncertain, like she didn't know whether to trust the softness in his voice. Another sound broke the moment, a paw, the soft snort from the stallion Mara had calmed the night before. The horse stood quietly, watching them with gentle eyes. "See?" she whispered, rising to stroke its nose. Horses understand more than people think. Colt watched her, realizing just how much strength lived inside this girl who spoke in quiet tones and hid in shadows. She had secrets. She had scars. She had a quiet fire that refused to be put out, and as Colt sat there in the dusty barn, surrounded by horses and lantern light, he felt something shift inside him again, stronger this time. Clearer. Mara wasn't just different. She was extraordinary. And he was no longer sure he could ignore what that meant. The next morning, the Kane household was already buzzing with tension before the sun even finished climbing over the horizon. Colt woke with a heaviness that settled deep in his chest, an uncomfortable mix of last night's discoveries, Mara's hidden bruises, and the growing weight of his father's expectations. As he dressed, he replayed the barn conversation in his mind. Mara's trembling voice, her quiet strength, her resignation to being hurt and overlooked. And somewhere beneath all of that, the quiet spark she stirred in him, one he barely knew what to do with. But Bartholomew Kane was not a man who allowed his son the luxury of quiet thinking. By the time Colt stepped into the dining room, his father was already seated at the head of the long table, upright and severe despite his worsening health. A silver cane lay nearby, though Bartholomew refused to use it unless absolutely necessary. To him, weakness, even the appearance of it, was unacceptable. "Sit," Bartholomew ordered, gesturing sharply. Colt sat. For several minutes, the only sound was the clinking of cutlery. Then Bartholomew spoke, voice low but cutting. "We have guests arriving at noon," Colt frowned. "Again?" "Father, we just hosted 3 families yesterday." "And you sent all 3 daughters away without consideration," Bartholomew snapped. "You barely looked at them. You barely spoke." His eyes hardened. "You are running out of time, son." Colt gritted his teeth. "I'm not choosing a wife like I'm buying cattle. This isn't romance, Colt." Bartholomew slammed a fist on the table, coughing immediately afterward. The fit shook him, forcing him to grip the table until his breath steadied. But even then, his voice remained sharp. "This is legacy. This ranch needs a woman from a strong family, a woman with breeding, with connections, with stability." Colt felt heat rise in his chest. "You mean someone wealthy? Someone who will make you look good?" Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. "I mean someone worthy of the Kane name. Someone who won't embarrass this family." Colt pushed his chair back slightly. "And who decides what's worthy?" His father leaned forward, voice lowering into a command that felt like a chain tightening around Colt's throat. "I do." The room fell into a tense silence. Bartholomew wiped his mouth with a cloth, composed once again. "Lydia Barrett, the banker's daughter, she'd be here today. Perfectly respectable. Her family is wealthy, powerful. She's refined, educated. A woman who could support you socially, financially, and politically." Colt's stomach twisted. Lydia was kind enough, but tragically uninterested in ranch life. She'd once screamed upon seeing a chicken. She belonged in salons and tea parlors, not dusty barns and open fields, but Bartholomew wasn't finished. "There are also the Crowleys and the Beaumonts returning before the weekends. I've arranged dinners. And next Sunday, the mayor's niece will stay with us. She's traveled from 2 counties over." Colt stared, incredulous. "You've planned all that without even asking me?" "You lost the privilege of choosing, Colt," Bartholomew said coldly, "when you failed to demonstrate any effort to find a suitable woman yourself." Colt opened his mouth to protest, but Bartholomew raised a hand. "And another thing." His father's voice dropped into an icy tone. "I've noticed you wandering around the barns at night, avoiding guests, avoiding your responsibilities." Colt stiffened. The mention of the barn, the place where his heart had begun to drift toward. Mara felt like someone had struck a bruise inside him. Bartholomew's gaze sharpened, penetrating. "You're not avoiding this marriage, are you?" Colt forced his expression to remain neutral. "No." "Good," Bartholomew said. "Because I won't allow you to waste your time with distractions." The implication hung in the air like poison. Colt didn't flinch, but the words sliced deep. His father didn't know about Mara, not the bruises, not the burden she carried, not the quiet fire she possessed. But Bartholomew could sense something shifting in his son, and he wanted to crush it before it grew. Bartholomew stood, leaning heavily on the table. Today you will be presentable, attentive, and polite. You will make progress toward choosing a bride. I will not tolerate defiance. Colt watched his father walk away, brittle but unbending, determined to shape his son's future by force. When the door finally closed, Colt exhaled shakily. For the first time, he understood what choosing Mara would truly mean, not just defying expectations, but shattering them. Not just disappointing his father, but betraying a legacy. Not just risking his inheritance, but walking away from everything he'd ever known. The pressure pressed down harder than ever, and yet, beneath it all, he couldn't forget the girl in rags with bruised wrists, gentle hands, and a courage no silk-gown bride could ever match. The day Colt made his decision dawned bright and tense, as though the sky itself sensed what was about to unfold. Guests swarmed the Kane Ranch's veranda. Mothers in their finest gowns, daughters twirling parasols, and a few suitors lounging in polished boots, exchanging anticipatory glances. Inside, the house smelled of fresh flowers, simmering roast, and the faint burn of cigar smoke, every detail carefully orchestrated for the grand announcement. Colt felt the weight of every eye on him as he stood in the main parlor, his back rigid, his heart pounding at his ribs like a wild mustang. Across from him, Bartholomew sat in his imposing chair, Kane resting beside him. His guests, ladies and gentlemen of prominent families, leaned forward with polite smiles, their high expectations hidden, effectively behind cordial expressions. When the butler announced that Colt had something to say, a ripple of curiosity coursed through the crowd. Some young women hid hopeful smiles, thinking perhaps he'd name one of them. Others exchanged subtle smirks, confident in their mother's plans. Colt cleared his throat. His voice was steadier than he felt. "Thank you for gathering here today," he began, glancing at Bartholomew, then at the families who'd traveled in hopes of alliance. "I know my father has given me 30 days to decide whom I will marry." He paused, chest tight, and allowed the silence to stretch a silence, so thick it felt like he was holding the entire room in his fist. "I have thought long and hard about this decision," he continued. And in that moment, he felt the fierce eyes of his suitors drilling into his spine. "But I will not choose someone just because of their name, their money, or their status." A murmur ran through the crowd, soft gasps, whispered exclamations. Colt raised his hand, steadying himself. "There is someone here. Someone you may not think worthy of a place in this announcement," he said, turning toward Mara, who was standing quietly in the back of the room, near the doorway. Her patched dress, though cleaned, showed signs of wear. Her boots were plain, her hair loosely tied. But in Colt's eyes, she looked more elegant than any satin dress in the room. He stepped toward her, and his voice dropped. "Mara, would you come here, please?" Her eyes widened, and she flushed. She shook her head, embarrassed but with gentle encouragement from Colt. She stepped forward, small and uncertain, but steady. The guests leaned forward. Bartholomew's face tightened. Colt continued, louder now so all could hear. "Mara, I choose you. You are the woman I want to marry." Shock cracked across faces. Some ladies gasped, a few men frowned, and cold Aunt Beatrice's hand flew to her fan. One of the Beaumont twins nearly made a sound of outrage. The luster of polite smiles shattered. Bartholomew stood abruptly, cane thumping on the wooden floor. "What did you say her name?" His voice was brittle, edged with disbelief. "Mara," Colt repeated. "I love her, or at least, I respect her more than I ever could respect a facade." She's the only person here I believe in. She's honest, kind, strong. She's not simply a name on a family ledger. One of the visiting dowager ladies gasped. The orphan stable girl? She whispered, and her voice carried across the room. Yes, Colt answered calmly. Her family may not be written in our registries, but her courage, her heart, her integrity, I know them. I choose to build my life with her, not because of what she is, but because of who she is. Murmurs rose, some polite applause from a few more open-minded guests, but mostly stunned silence. A young suitor who'd been certain of winning looked suddenly deflated. His mother, red-faced, whispered furiously under her breath. Bartholomew's voice came again, harsh and cutting. This is absurd. Do you understand what you are doing? Do you know what this will mean to the Kane name? To our reputation? Colt met his father's eyes firmly. I know exactly what it means. I'm choosing something real, not just legacy. Mara's cheeks burned. She looked down, uncertain, twisting her hands. Yet she did not run. Colt exhaled and extended his hand. Will you marry me? Tears glistened briefly in Mara's eyes, not shame, but something raw and unguarded. She nodded, voice soft. Yes. At that, a few guests clapped tentatively at first, then more bravely. Others simply stared, mouths agape. Bartholomew's jaw clenched, his pride wounded more than his body. The scandal had begun. Colt felt the fiercest surge of relief, fear, and exhilaration all at once. He had broken his father's chain, defied expectations, chosen the girl in rags, and he meant every word in that moment. The Kane legacy changed. Not by name, not by wealth, but by love, conviction, and courage. Unfolds in the aftermath of Colt's shocking announcement, his declaration that he chooses Mara, the orphan stable girl, as his bride. What follows is the storm no one can outrun, the inevitable collision between a father obsessed with legacy and a son determined to build a life based on love, not social obligation. The gathering ends in chaos. Guests whisper behind lace gloves, some rushing out before being associated with the scandal, others lingering only to witness the fallout. Mara stands frozen, overwhelmed by the weight of her new reality, while Colt stands firm beside her, aware that the real battle is just beginning. And indeed, it begins within minutes. Bartholomew Kane storms into his private study with Colt ordered to follow. The heavy oak door slams shut behind them, a sound that echoes like a sentence being passed. It is the first moment Colt and his father face each other without the buffer of guests, expectations, or polite smiles. The air in the room feels thick, charged, almost suffocating. Bartholomew begins not with questions but accusations. He calls Colt's choice reckless, shameful, a humiliation to the Kane name. His voice is sharp, each word carrying the full force of years spent building their reputation from scratch. To him, every partnership, every investment, and every alliance has been meticulously cultivated. This marriage was supposed to crown all of it. But Colt stands firm. The son who once bowed under expectation now refuses to bend. He explains that a marriage without love is a prison, that he cannot bind himself to someone he feels nothing for simply to impress society. Bartholomew dismisses this as childish fantasy. In his eyes, Colt sounds like a man who has forgotten responsibility, who thinks life is ruled by feelings instead of strategy. The argument escalates as Bartholomew accuses Mara, directly calling her opportunistic unworthy a burden. He insists she will drag their name into the dirt. Colt immediately defends her, his voice rising with anger. This is the first time in his life he openly confronts his father without hesitation. Colt tells him the truth. Mara isn't the burden Bartholomew's pride is. This statement hits like a blade. For years, Colt tiptoed around his father's ego. Now he finally pierces it. Bartholomew is stunned, not used to being challenged, especially not by his own son. His shock quickly turns into bitter resolve. If Colt chooses Mara, Bartholomew says he does so at a price. He threatens to disinherit Colt, strip him of land, wealth, and the ranch he was raised to inherit. Bartholomew believes this ultimatum will scare him back in line. For the first time, Colt hesitates not because he doubts his choice, but because the ranch is part of his soul. It's where he grew up, where his mother once walked, where every sunrise shaped him. The idea of losing it is devastating. Yet when he pictures the alternative, living a life shaped entirely by a man who sees him as a pawn, he realizes the inheritance would become a gilded cage. Colt chooses Mara again, not with impulse this time, but with clarity. He tells his father he will leave if he must. He will build a life from nothing rather than shape it around. Bartholomew's pride. The words break something between them. Bartholomew, unable to believe his son would choose love over legacy, dismisses him from the house. Colt leaves with a heart heavy from the fracture, but strengthened by conviction. Meanwhile, Mara waits outside, unaware of the ultimatum. The moment Colt steps out, she sees the exhaustion and pain in his eyes. When he tells her what his father said, she immediately blames herself. Insisting he should walk away from her to keep his future, Colt takes her hands and tells her the truth. She is his future. Together, they step into the unknown, no longer bound by the ranch, but bound by the choice that ignited a rift and set them free. The tension that had been simmering for weeks finally erupted. Colt, having declared his choice of Mara to the world, was now facing the inevitable reckoning, confronting his father not just in private, but with the truth of Mara's past and the injustices hidden in plain sight. This confrontation wasn't merely about marriage, it was about history, betrayal, and the Kane family legacy itself. It began in the study, the same room where countless decisions about the ranch had been made over the years. Bartholomew Kane sat behind his massive oak desk, arms folded, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. Colt entered, Mara at his side, her small hand gripping his with quiet courage. The air in the room was thick, charged with years of expectation, authority, and the weight of secrets. Bartholomew wasted no time. His voice, sharp and tremulous, cut through the silence. "So this is the girl? This orphan? You dare bring her here after everything I have built? After everything I have sacrificed?" Colt stepped forward, his own voice steady but filled with a new, unshakable authority. "She is not here to disgrace anyone, Father. She is here because she is the only person I trust, the only person whose strength, kindness, and honesty I respect. And you, more than anyone, need to understand why." Bartholomew's eyes narrowed. "Do you think wealth, family, and status mean nothing to you? That all this," he gestured at the ranch, the ledgers, the walls filled with Kane history, "means nothing?" Colt shook his head. "I am not dismissing it. But wealth and status mean nothing if it comes at the cost of my conscience, at the cost of love, at the cost of knowing what is right." He paused, then continued, his gaze unflinching. "Do you remember the Kane estate's old horse stables? The ones you took control of years ago after the accident?" Bartholomew stiffened. He knew where this was going. Mara's father, Colt said, his voice rising with intensity, was a horse trainer, one of the best in the county. He trusted you, Bartholomew. He believed in fairness, integrity. And yet, when he crossed paths with you in business, he disappeared. And the family you never acknowledged, the family Mara should have had, you erased them from history. You destroyed them. The silence that followed was deafening. Bartholomew's jaw tightened. For the first time, his control faltered. His past misdeeds, hidden for decades, now confronted him in the flesh. in the form of the young woman he had dismissed as nothing. Mara, who had been quiet until now, spoke softly but with piercing clarity. I have nothing but what I work for. I don't ask for favors, and I don't seek revenge. But I deserve to live without fear of being crushed because of your pride. Colt looked at his father one last time. You taught me to honor the land, to respect tradition, to protect the ranch. But you never taught me to protect people, to protect the innocent. I am fixing that now. Bartholomew's hands clenched into fists. The years of stubbornness, fear, and control collided with reality. His son, standing tall beside the girl he had underestimated, refused to be intimidated. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Bartholomew exhaled a deep, rattling breath that carried a mix of defeat and reluctant respect. So, this is your choice, he said quietly. You are willing to risk everything for her. Colt nodded. I am. And I will build the ranch and my life alongside her, not above her, not without her. For the first time, the gap between father and son did not feel like an unbridgeable chasm. It was tense, raw, and painful, but it was honest. And in that honesty, a new understanding began to form. The confrontation ended not with victory, but with reckoning. Bartholomew could no longer hide from the consequences of his actions, and Colt could no longer ignore what his heart demanded. The past had been confronted. The future was now theirs to shape together. The sun rose over Iron Creek Ranch with a brilliance that felt almost symbolic, spilling gold across the fields, the barns, and the paddocks. It was a new day not just in the calendar, but in the lives of Colt Kane and Mara. The events of the past weeks, the ultimatum, the parade of suitors, the barn encounters, and the confrontations with his father had all led to this moment. The ranch, once a symbol of rigid legacy and control, was now ready to become something entirely different, a place built on love, trust, and hard-won authenticity. Colt walked across the fields, Mara at his side, the air crisp and alive with the scent of hay and wildflowers. Horses trotted beside them, their hooves kicking up dust in lazy clouds. For Colt, every step felt lighter than it had in months. The weight of expectation, the chains of his father's control, and the suffocating pressure of society were gone. He had chosen a life that felt real, and he had chosen the woman who made that life worth living. Mara looked around at the ranch she had once tended in silence, her hands brushing along the rails of the fence. It feels different today, she said softly, like it finally belongs to the people who care about it. Colt smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. It does, and it will keep growing stronger as long as we do it together. Inside the ranch house, the air had shifted as well. Bartholomew, though still proud and stubborn, had begun to come to terms with his son's choices. He watched from the veranda as Colt and Mara walked through the yard, realizing that this union, this unexpected pairing, was not a threat to the Kane legacy but a continuation of it in a form he had never imagined. Mara's strength, resilience, and unwavering kindness were exactly the qualities that could protect and nurture the ranch, not polished names or arranged alliances. Over the next few weeks, the Kane Ranch began to transform. Mara brought her insight and care to every corner, organizing the barns, tending the animals, and even training some of the younger horses with techniques she had learned from her father. Colt worked alongside her, not as a master of the land and she a mere servant, but as partners. Together, they innovated methods to improve the ranch's efficiency and profitability while keeping the animals and land at the center of every decision. Their love grew quietly, naturally, in the spaces between chores, during twilight rides, and in the shared laughter over small victories. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was real, enduring, and stronger than any legacy built on wealth alone. Every moment together reminded them why Colt had chosen her, why Mara had trusted him, and why their bond mattered more than approval, fortune, or status. Even the town began to see the change. Stories of Colt Kane and the orphan stable girl who became the ranch's heart spread through the county. While some were still scandalized by his choice, many respected the courage it took to defy convention. People noticed the thriving ranch, the happy animals, and the unwavering partnership between the two, and slowly respect replaced gossip. On a quiet evening, Colt and Mara stood on a hill overlooking the ranch. The sun dipped behind the hills, casting a warm, amber glow over the fields they had chosen to protect together. Mara leaned her head on Colt's shoulder, and for the first time, both felt a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with wealth or titles. "This," Mara whispered, "is home." Colt tightened his arm around her. "And it always will be ours to shape, ours to protect." The Kane legacy had endured, but it had evolved. Not through rigid control or social expectation, but through courage, love, and unwavering integrity. Colt and Mara's union became a new chapter, one where honesty and heart defined success, where family was chosen as much by devotion as by blood, and where a young girl in rags became not just a bride, but the rightful steward of the ranch alongside the man who truly loved her. And in that quiet triumph, Iron Creek Ranch stood taller than ever, not as a monument to wealth or pride, but as a symbol of a legacy rebuilt on love, respect, and the promise of a future crafted together.